Dinner was served, but someone left a side of murder. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host Axen. Let's grow this sleuthing circle. Drop a comment and share where you're tuning in from. Your messages always brighten my day. Let's begin. It was a Wednesday afternoon. The kind of grey New York was proud to churn out in March. Wet enough to wreck your socks and cold enough to make you question your station in life. I was at my desk in the office, wrestling with the monthly expense report and fending off the creeping notion that I might actually be growing responsible when the bell rang downstairs. I didn't have to check the clock. Fritz, our houseman and culinary magician, doesn't do doorbells between noon and 2 unless he's unconscious or the guest's got a badge. Wolfe was in the plant rooms giving his orchids their daily sermon, and I was supposed to be invisible. The woman who came through the door had the kind of face you remember from high-end magazines, and the kind of walk that would have had Saul Panzer raising his eyebrows. She was in her early 40s, dressed like an Upper East Side widow, with a fondness for Chanel and control. Her eyes were sharp, her nose slightly aristocratic, and her mouth hinted that she'd never once said please unless it was in a courtroom. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, already halfway to the red leather chair, "unless I've been impersonated. And you..." I stayed seated, but my fingers slipped off the typewriter keys. This had promise. "Lisette Harrow," she said. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent. That's popular round here. You'll have to wait. He's with his orchids. I can pay. That's more popular." "What sort of urgency are we discussing? Blackmail, betrayal, or something more pedestrian like murder?" Her lip twitched. "None yet, but I expect one by Saturday night. Possibly before dessert." Now that was a line worth an eyebrow lift. I stood and went to the kitchen to rouse Fritz. Wolfe doesn't like being interrupted when he's whispering sweet nothings to a Mazdavelia, but he likes unexpected female clients even less. Fritz nodded and disappeared up the stairs, and 5 minutes later Wolfe descended like a sullen volcano, silent, round and radiating resentment. He settled in the yellow chair, adjusted the cuffs of his grey house jacket, and stared at her with the sort of expression you'd expect if someone had parked a Buick in his orchid room. "You have 3 minutes," he said. Lisette Harrow wasted none of them. "I'm co-owner of Harrow & Harrow, a high-end event firm. We're catering a private supper club's centennial gala this Friday evening. It's a closed circle, 14 members, all men. Ultra-exclusive, old money, inherited seats. The menu was finalized weeks ago." Wolfe grunted. That wasn't disinterest, it was irritation dressed as indifference. "Go on," I said. "This morning our kitchen manager Ronnie Dell didn't come in. He hasn't answered calls. He's a punctual man, meticulous. This wouldn't happen, not to him, not to week of the Gormandale supper." "The what?" I asked. "Gormandale," she said, "an elite culinary society. Founded They claim Escoffier himself gave the inaugural toast." I failed to see, Wolfe began, but she cut him off. Not rudely but deftly. "Yesterday someone tampered with the final menu file." A note was inserted, encrypted of course, inside the recipe code. It wasn't culinary, it was a threat. That got him. Wolfe shifted a fraction. "A threat?" he echoed. "Yes. Dishonesty may be dressed in sauce, but it's still poison beneath. By Saturday the last course will be dead." Wolfe closed his eyes, slowly, as if a migraine had passed through the wall and taken up residence behind his forehead. And this menacing aphorism was found where exactly? In the final menu file, the one only Ronnie Dell and I had access to. I checked the log. The message was inserted from his credentials at 2:17 a.m. this morning. "That suggests either guilt or a skilled intruder," I said. "Or both," she replied crisply. "I want Mr. Wolfe to determine which." Quietly. "Before Saturday, before there's anything irreparable." "You said you expected a murder," Wolfe said, more annoyed than alarmed. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because 3 years ago, a chef named Lionel Parr, Ronnie's mentor, was found dead the night before another private dinner. Same society, same secrecy. It was ruled a stroke. I never believed it. And now this?" Wolfe leaned back. "You are correct. This is not yet a crime. It is speculation, well embroidered, but conjectural, and I do not act on conjecture. Then wait until someone dies," she snapped. "But don't say, I didn't give you a head start." She stood. "My card. I'll be at the Parc del Monaco for the next 2 nights. Room 803. "If you change your mind, I won't," Wolfe said. She left. I looked at Wolfe. He closed his eyes again. "Don't you dare say it, Archie." I wasn't going to, but just for the record, I give it until 8 p.m. tonight, before you ask me to call Saul. He grunted. 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Fritz came in, eyes wide. It's the police, he said quietly. They want to speak with Mr. Wolfe about a man named Ronnie Dell. They say he's dead. Wolfe's eyelids didn't even flutter. He opened his eyes, reached for the bell pull, and gave it one firm tug. Bring beer, he said. And Archie, go let them in. It seems we've accepted Miss Harrow's case after all. The two detectives from the 11th precinct were not the kind you offer sherry to. One was wiry and balding with the clipped efficiency of a man who never chewed gum without checking it for cyanide first. The other, younger and broader, had the silent scowl of someone who'd rather be punching a wall than shaking hands. I offered both a seat. They didn't take them. We're looking into the death of Ronald Dell, the balding one said. He was found this morning in his apartment in Chelsea. No sign of forced entry, no visible wounds. Dead on the kitchen floor. You've heard of him. Miss Harrow mentioned him an hour ago, I replied. She seemed concerned he might be unavailable for souffle duty. Miss Harrow called in this morning to report him missing, the younger one said. Then she updated us after she visited his place herself. We arrived shortly after. He turned his gaze toward Wolfe, who had positioned himself like an irate sultan behind his desk, fingers steepled, eyes closed. She said she came here before she went to the apartment. She did, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. You will find no relevance in that. She came seeking consultation, not absolution. Consultation about what? The wiry one asked, pulling out a notepad. Wolfe opened his eyes. Mr. Goodwin, tell them. I did, relaying Lizette Harrow's visit. Her line about poison dressed in sauce, and the encrypted death threat slipped into the menu. I didn't embellish. Wolfe hates embroidery unless it's on his bathrobe. When I was done, the scowler crossed his arm. You believe this threat is related to Dell's death? Wolfe shifted slightly in his chair, which in Wolfe-ese means he's considering whether you're worth his time. I am not in the habit of believing anything prematurely. Miss Harrow's instinct was that Dell's disappearance was not benign. Now that he is confirmed dead, that instinct seems less fanciful. The wiry one scribbled a note. We've contacted the ME. Preliminary report says no trauma, no blood, no struggle, just a man in his apron, on the tile, cause of death unknown for now. No trace of food or drink in the stomach? Wolfe asked. That got them both to glance at each other. It'll take tox screens to be sure, the younger one said. But there was a pot on the stove, boiled over, no dish plated. Then he hadn't eaten, Wolfe muttered. Curious. The detectives stayed another 10 minutes. They asked if Wolfe had any reason to believe someone from the Gormandale Supper Club would want Dell dead. Wolfe didn't answer, which was answer enough. They left promising to call if anything developed, a word I suspected they only used when they'd finished elbowing suspects in interrogation rooms. I followed them out and watched them disappear into the sleep. When I returned, Wolfe had rung for beer and was already halfway through his first glass. I suppose, he said, that Miss Harrow will return. Or should? I nodded. Should I call Saul? Not yet. First we must determine whether this incident justifies the risk of involvement. If Dell died naturally, he didn't. I cut in. He gave me a look. I'll bet Fritz's best terrine on it, I said. Dell was careful, punctual, and by all accounts professionally paranoid. The man wrote his recipes in encrypted code, and cross-referenced ingredients like they were nuclear secrets. You think he just keeled over before poaching the duck? No. I think it is precisely the kind of narrative one inserts when one wishes to control perception. He took another sip. Still, call Miss Harrow. Ask her to return this evening. Tell her I expect to be paid. So I did. She answered on the third ring, curt and winded. When I gave her the message, there was a beat of silence before she said, I'll be there at 6. Then she hung up. At 6 sharp she arrived, this time with less polish. Her lipstick was gone, her coat was damp, and her tone was all business. You've heard, she said without waiting to sit. We've heard, I replied. The police dropped by. They're asking questions. Wolfe is intrigued. She turned toward the office, where Wolfe sat as immobile as the Egyptian Sphinx, minus the sense of humor. I didn't kill him, she said bluntly. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. A declaration that early in a conversation is either guilt or gall, which is necessity, she said, and finally took the red chair again. Ronnie and I had arguments, creative differences. He was brilliant, but erratic. I funded his entire post-par kitchen bill. There were rumors he was going to leave Harrow and Harrow after the gala and start something under his own name. We fought about it last week. That will be public knowledge shortly, Wolfe said. The police will follow it, of course, as will others. Then help me. You don't need to care about the gala, but something is happening inside that club. Lionel Parr died 3 years ago, under similar circumstances. No wounds, no signs of struggle, no answers. And now Ronnie. And the message in the file? Wolfe closed his eyes. You said the file was secure. It was. Biometric access from within our internal system, logged at 2:17 a.m. from Ronnie's account. Is that unusual? Extremely. Ronnie rarely worked past midnight, and never alone. And the note itself, was it signed? No. She hesitated. But whoever left it knew the format. They buried the text inside the instruction layer for a saffron reduction. You'd only find it if you were compiling the dish macros. I see, Wolfe sighed. This is not culinary posturing. It is performance. Someone is conducting a sequence, a menu with death as dessert. She flinched, visibly. I gave Wolfe a look, but he ignored it. And the other members of this club? He asked. Gormandale. 14 of them. The original bylaws stipulate unanimous vote for new admittance. No publicity, no women, no media. It's part culinary cult, part investment circle. Investment. They pool money into rare food ventures, vintages, endangered cheeses, limited batch whiskies. Ronnie used to call them the taste tycoons. And who leads them? She hesitated. Gideon Larrabee, patriarch of Larrabee. Commodities. He's 81. He holds the final say on everything from menu themes to seating placement. Wolfe's eyes opened. I want names. All of them. Their roles, their occupations, their relationship to Dell and to Pa. Deliver that list tomorrow morning. Miss Goodwin, I'm ready, I said, already reaching for my coat. What's the first stop? Wolfe considered. Begin with Mr. Larrabee. Learn his appetite. For power, for cuisine, and for vengeance. Miss Harrow stood. You believe me now? Wolfe drained his glass. I believe someone is preparing a feast, and they have already begun with the amuse-bouche. She shivered, and left. Wolfe rang for another beer. I opened the door and stepped into the city night, which felt suddenly a little colder than it had 2 hours ago. Larrabee's building sat on the Upper East Side, the kind of stone-front fortress that advertises its silence, its security and its doormen with military posture. The nameplate didn't say Gideon Larrabee, of course it said Wexmore, in discreet brass, but the elevator operator didn't even ask for my name, just a once-over, and a grunt, before ascending to the penthouse with the sort of indifference that comes from years of watching rich people age badly. Gideon Larrabee opened the door himself. He was tall for his age, what looked like all 6 feet and a little more, dressed in a robe that cost more than my car and with a face that had stopped pretending to age gracefully. The man had white eyebrows like angry punctuation marks, and hands that could still crush a walnut, or a business deal. He looked like the kind of man who spoke at board meetings in iambic pentameter, and fired people with a nod. You're Wolfe's man, he said. Not a question. I'm the one who moves, I said cheerfully. Archie Goodwin. He gestured me in with a curt flick of 2 fingers, already halfway across the room. The penthouse was the kind of place that didn't have furniture so much as relics, leather the color of aged scotch, polished wood older than Prohibition, and art that might have been stolen or donated, depending on the tax year. He lowered himself into a wingback and waved at a bottle on a tray. If you drink, pour. If you talk, make it quick. I can multitask, I said, and poured myself a half-inch of something peaty enough to double as floor varnish. You heard about Ronald Dell? I did. He didn't blink. Lizette Harrow called me 2 hours ago. Told me you and Wolfe are sniffing around. Just gathering context. The context in this case being, why would someone want Dell dead? That's a fool's errand. Ronnie wasn't important enough for murder. That was rich coming from a man who built an empire on soy futures and steakhouse monopolies. He was about to cook the centennial dinner for your supper club, I said. That counts as important. Gideon's mouth twitched, a flicker of disdain. He was a technician. His sources were precise, but he didn't understand taste. He was a coward in a kitchen. You always talk that kindly about your chefs, or only after they're dead. His eyes narrowed, but not at the insult, at the implication. What are you suggesting? Nothing, I said smoothly. Just checking if the Gormandale Supper Club has a history of chefs dying inconveniently. That earned me silence. A long one. Finally, he said, you mean Lionel Parr. You remember him. Everyone did. Arrogant bastard, but brilliant. And dead, I pointed. Same club, same dinner theme, 3 years ago. Coincidence? He leaned forward, eyes glittering. Is that what you think this is? Some kind of culinary vendetta? A murderer with a palate? It's your club, I said. You tell me. Anyone in your little 14-man fraternity known for dramatic exits, or vendetta stewing? Gideon reached for a cigar but didn't light it. Just rolled it in his fingers. We're financiers, archivists, collectors, not lunatics. The club exists to honor food, rare food, true food. We preserve it, fund it, protect it. Like a museum? I asked. Like a religion, he said, and meant it.
That's when I knew we were dealing with something more than eccentric gourmet. These weren't just men who liked foie gras and vintage Burgundy. These were zealotry with menu, culinary monks with trust funds, the kind of people who would see a recipe as a manifesto. Who's next in line to select the chef if the current one exits early? Selection is by committee, but if there's no consensus, I hold tie-breaking authority. Were you planning to override it this year? He didn't answer, just stared at the cigar. I finished the drink and stood. Thanks for the chat. One last thing. Did Dell ever mention anything strange to you? Paranoia? Arguments? Any threats? Not to me, Gideon's. But if someone wanted him silenced, it wouldn't be about the food. It'd be about what he knew. Ronnie Dell kept notes, exhaustive ones, about clients, ingredients, money trails. I paused. Money trails. He didn't elaborate. He just gave me a look, like a poker player folding a full house. Outside I called Wolfe and relayed everything. He was predictably unimpressed. He called him a coward in the kitchen. Wolfe grumbled. That is a graceless thing to say of a dead man. Larrabee lacks refinement. He says Dell kept notes, about everything, including finances. Then find them, Wolfe snapped. Dell's apartment. Tonight, if the police haven't already carted everything off. I'm not sure they'll let me. You're charming, Wolfe said, and hung up. I headed to Chelsea. The apartment was sealed, of course. Yellow tape, board uniforms, and the kind of silence that sticks to walls after a body's been removed. I flashed my credentials, name-dropped Lieutenant Rowcliffe. He hates me, which makes it sound believable, and talked my way. Dell's place was compact, minimalist, and smelled like garlic and regret. The kitchen was pristine except for the scorched pot on the stove. I opened cabinets, flipped through cookbooks, found a row of notebooks in a locked drawer, clearly Dell's own hand, encrypted, just like Lisette said. I took one, not all of them, just one to be strategic. You don't loot a dead man's apartment when the NYPD might still have cameras rolling. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was already in his chair, nursing his third beer. He took the notebook without a word and flipped it open. Encrypted, he murmured, but pattern-based, ingredient substitutions, marginalia. He read for a long time. I waited. Finally, he said, this is not just recipe tracking. Dell was cataloging people, who ate what, who paid for what, who insisted on substitution. And look, here, he pointed. It was a single line, buried in a page about duck confit variations. Larrabee insisted on no saffron again. Claims allergy, same as in Pa's final menu. I blinked. You think I think, Wolfe said grimly, that saffron may not be the only ingredient to have been excluded. He reached for the bell. Fritz, bring dinner. Mr. Goodwin, begin compiling profiles of every Gormandale member. I want backgrounds, holdings, preference, especially dietary. And Lisette, she will return tomorrow morning with the list. Let her think she's still ahead of us. He closed the notebook, his eyes glittering. This is no longer about taste, he said softly. It's about truth. And someone in that club is feeding lies with a silver spoon. Lisette arrived the next morning, with a folder and a face that looked like it hadn't slept. She was in a steel gray suit, all edges and urgency, and she didn't bother with pleasantry. Wolfe was already seated in the office, naturally, but he'd foregone his usual indifference. When Fritz brought in the coffee, Wolfe actually sipped his before it cooled, which in our world is the equivalent of declaring, I brought everything I could gather, Lisette said, handing me the folder. 14 members including Gideon, full names, occupations, brief bios, most are legacy admissions, grandsons of founders. They treat it like a sacred trust, or a wine cellar nobody else gets to touch. Wolfe took the list without rising, and studied it for a full 2 minutes, while the rest of us pretended not to breathe. Then he gestured to the red chair. Explain, he said. Lisette sat, crossed her legs, and did not hesitate. Of the 14, only 2 ever opposed Lionel Parr's appointment as head chef for the 1921 dinner. Gideon Larrabee and Malcolm Varner. Varner owns a series of boutique vineyards in Napa. He's a purist, believes in heritage ingredients only. Gideon thought Parr's food was over-designed. He thought Ronnie Dell was too dependent on molecular techniques, foam and emulsions. Offended him, and yet they kept using him, I said. Because he delivered. He had technique, but there were murmurs he kept files, notes on members, their eating habits, health conditions, even political donations. I didn't believe it until you said you found one. Wolfe gave her a small dry nod. A file is a kind way of describing it. A ledger might be more accurate. Miss Dell was documenting patterns, particularly culinary contradictions. Contradictions, she echoed. Wolfe leaned back slightly, letting the word hang in the air. For example, he said, Larrabee insists he has a saffron allergy, claims it gives him respiratory trouble. But 3 years ago, he approved a menu that featured a Basque seafood stew with a saffron broth, and Par's final menu, I cut in, also featured saffron. Lisette's eyes widened. You think he lied about the allergy, or used it, Wolfe murmured, as a shield, a tool for subtle exclusion. If saffron was part of a dish, and someone consumed it unaware, what might be assumed as accident might actually be orchestration. Lisette looked genuinely unsettled. But what would be the purpose? Why would someone manipulate the menu to that degree? To control perception, Wolfe said, and to expose something, or someone. Lionel Parr died under suspiciously bland circumstances. Now Dell is gone. Both were involved in the menu creation. Both had access to the same culinary data, and both ended up dead shortly before a major event. She sat back. So someone inside the Gormandale circle is using the menu, literally as a weapon. More precisely, Wolfe said, as a message. I passed him the notebook again. He flipped to the margin I'd noticed the night before. This note, Wolfe said, tapping the page, documents Larrabee's objection to saffron. But the context implies something more. Dell wasn't simply noting allergies. He was tracking inconsistencies. Members who rejected ingredients they'd previously praised. Ones who suddenly refused specific wines, specific cheeses, without explanation. Lisette frowned. That sounds petty. Not when you realize that the club's investments follow their preferences. If a member rejects a Burgundy vintage, the club might divest. If someone insists on sourcing from a rare truffle producer, they may buy up the supply. Preferences become financial movements. Tastes become stock signals. That hit her. So if someone knew the patterns were being faked, or manipulated, they could expose it, or profit from it. Indeed, Wolfe said, and both Parr and Dell appear to have been tracing those irregularities, which means, they found something. I said. Something worth killing for. Wolfe nodded once curtly. Lisette rubbed her temples. The gala is tomorrow. There's no menu yet. No chef. No one the club trusts. They'll cancel. Let them, Wolfe said. It may force the culprit's hand. The gala is the performance, Miss Harrow, but the act has already begun. They cannot risk losing the stage, I added, and cancelling might make someone desperate enough to make a move. She looked between us. What do you need from me now? What do you need from me now? What do you need from me now?
Discretion, Wolfe said. Say nothing to the club. Let them assume you're searching for a last-minute replacement chef. Tell them you're narrowing down options, and above all, let them believe they're still in control. Lisette stood, nodded once, and left without another word. As the door closed behind her, Wolfe sighed. Archie, summon Saul Panzer. I didn't need to ask why. Tell him to find Malcolm Varner, learn what he's eaten, what he's drunk, and who he's spoken to in the last 6 weeks, particularly in relation to Ronald Dell. And the others, they can wait. Larrabee and Varner are the pressure points. Apply force, and something will crack. Saul arrived within the hour. After briefing him and slipping him a copy of Lisette's file, I sent him on his way with a clean shirt and a new identity. He was now a wine broker from the Finger Lakes, angling for a tasting at Varner's private cellar. Wolfe retreated to the plant rooms for the better part of the afternoon. I stayed in the office with Dell's notebook, flipping through pages of coded recipe tweaks and cross-referenced ingredient substitutions. The man had been a data hoarder with a palate, every flavor, every request, every note of dissent, logged with the precision of a spy tracking enemy movements. That's when I saw it. One line, buried halfway through a menu entry for a goat cheese tart, warned me not to serve this, said I was stepping on old contracts, but I checked. Gideon sold the shares in 19. Who's still profiting? I stared at the page for a minute. It could have meant Dell himself, but that wouldn't make sense in the context. Someone warned him. Someone with access. Someone watching. I copied the note and took it to Wolfe, who was back in his chair with a glass of beer and his mood in neutral. He read it twice. Then he looked up at me and said, "This is not about food. This is about exposure. Someone inside Gormandale is laundering more than truffle contracts." I nodded, and Dell was following the flavor to find the money. Wolfe tapped the bell again. "Fritz," he said when the man appeared, "prepare the trout in saffron cream tonight. No substitutions. Archie, you'll join me. We have some thinking to do." Which, in Wolfe speak, meant we were close, and if we didn't choke on the saffron, maybe someone else would. The trout in saffron cream that night was excellent. Delicate, just the right edge of citrus under the saffron, and plated so perfectly I would have sworn Fritz was telepathically picking up Wolfe's expectations. Wolfe barely touched his fork. His focus was on the notebook, Dell's handwritten ledger of palettes and politics, now open on the table beside his beer. The only sound in the room was the faint rattle of the radiator and the soft scrape of my knife across china. Old contracts, Wolfe murmured. The language is careful, not debts, not obligations, contracts. And you think that's literal? I asked. He nodded. Yes, I suspect Dell was tracing culinary preferences that correlated with business shifts, possibly unreported exchanges. Someone might be manipulating food choices to reflect market cues or hide illicit gains. The gala offers a spectacle, but the real profit may lie in what's not served. I finished my fish and leaned back. Saul's probably halfway to Napa by now. Should we be worried about his waistline? Wolfe didn't rise to the bait. Saul is cautious, and besides, if Varner is involved, he will not suspect a wine broker. His vanity will override discretion. We returned to the office. Wolfe resumed his station in the oversized chair like a general sitting for a portrait. I pulled out the folder Lisette had provided and started cross-referencing the members of Gorman Dell with the few odd annotations Dell had made. It was slow going until I reached one name, Ezra Wint. According to the file, Ezra Wint was the club's logistics, a slim, mild-looking executive with a background in supply chain management and a seat on 3 organic import boards. His bio was so squeaky clean, it almost glowed. Wolfe looked at the page, then at me. Why is he in the club? Apparently, I said, he sources rare ingredient, caviar, truffles, spices, and he's not a chef. No, strictly procurement, imports and supply chain finesse. Wolfe tapped a thick finger on the armrest. If someone was rerouting product or hiding margins, that's where they'd do it. You think Wint's skimming? I think Wint is either complicit or observant. Either way, he's relevant. I picked up the phone and dialed Saul's secure line. He picked up on the second ring. Report, Wolfe said, bypassing any social obligations. I spent 2 hours with Varner, Saul said. He's sharp, paranoid, doesn't trust restaurants anymore, eats only at home or at the club, swears he's allergic to anchovies, but I caught him eating Caesar salad straight from a mason jar. I smiled. Wolfe didn't. And Varner didn't say his name directly, but he said something odd. Told me, quote, a good chef doesn't ask about wine pairings, he reads them like scripture. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. That's a deflection. He's worried. Keep watching him. But now turn your attention to Ezra Wint. I want to know where he gets his shipments, who signs off on them, and what he's done since Dell's death. Got it, Saul said, and hung up. Wolfe rang for another beer. I could tell from his breathing rhythm that we were 1 or 2 clicks away from something cracking open. And it did. Just after 8, the phone rang. I answered. Mr. Goodwin, it's Lisette. I put her on speaker. There's been a break-in, she said. At Harrow & Harrow, someone got into our main terminal. They only accessed one file. Wolfe's voice was suddenly sharper. Which one? Ronnie Dell's final menu. The gala draft. The version with the encrypted message. Was it copied? Wolfe asked. Yes, and then deleted. The logs show a complete wipe manual override. Wolfe's tone was heavy. Then someone is cleaning up. Accelerating. Lisette paused. Do you think they know I brought it to you? Almost certainly, Wolfe said. And you must act as if you do not. Play dumb. Say nothing to anyone. Make no changes to your behavior. I understand, she said. After she hung up, Wolfe steepled his finger. The original threat was not about murder. It was a warning. A leak. A signal sent by Dell to someone he trusted. Possibly Lisette. Possibly someone else. Then someone else found it, I said, and decided to eliminate the source. Wolfe grunted. And now they are erasing the trail. But it's too late. He stood up. Which, in Wolfe's world, is equivalent to a standing ovation from a corpse. We will summon the suspects, he said. Tomorrow evening, before the gala. I will question them here. All of them. Gideon Larrabee, Malcolm Varner, Ezra Wint, and 3 others of your choosing. Archie, use the list. Pick those with the most influence and the most to lose. I blinked. You want 6 suspects brought to the brownstone at once? Yes, and I want them off balance. Tell them we've confirmed Dell was murdered. Say the police are looking into everyone who had access to the menu file. That will suffice. And the purpose of this little dinner party, to let them betray each other, Wolfe said. Their alibis will fracture. Their stories will compete, and the pattern will emerge. He turned toward the windows, where the cold evening light filtered through the curtains. This is no longer a culinary investigation. he said. It is a matter of deception. Inheritance and greed disguised as taste. They believe themselves immune. That makes them predictable. I nodded. And that makes them beatable. He gave a rare smile. Indeed. Now go make the calls. And Archie, when you speak with Larrabee, tell him I've prepared a menu for tomorrow. 1 course. Served cold. I grinned. Vengeance à la carte. Revelation, Wolfe said. But yes, he may find the flavor unpleasant. The following morning began with a round of phone calls that felt less like appointment scheduling and more like diplomatic warfare. You'd think summoning 6 high-powered members of an elite gastronomic society to a private meeting at Nero Wolfe's brownstone would be like inviting royalty to a tasting menu. It was. Larrabee took the news with what passed for grace in his world. He grunted, accused me of theatrics, and finally said, fine, 6 sharp. If I smell vinegar, I leave. Ezra Wint was more cautious. Am I being accused of something? I told him no, not yet, which didn't seem to comfort him much. Malcolm Varner refused flat out, until I let slip that Wolfe had acquired a bottle of 1952 Domaine Leroy Richburg. After that he asked if he could bring a notepad. The other 3 I chose based on Wolfe's instructions. Byron Gitties, a former diplomat, turned caviar importer. Clive Desborough, who once owned half the dairy co-ops in Vermont, and still carried himself like he was made of cheese. And Desmond, a banker with the eyes of a sleepy vulture, and a voice like melted glass. They each confirmed with varying degrees of suspicion, and by noon the guest list was locked. Wolfe didn't leave his chair once that day. Not to eat, not to check on the orchids, not even to yell at me for misquoting Cicero, which I did on purpose just to test him. Instead he read Dell's ledger 3 more times, then gave it to me with 4 pages marked in ink. Memorize the patterns, he said. What Varner refused in 2021, what Wint substituted last year, what Gitties mysteriously avoided during a foie gras flight in May. These are not dietary quirks, these are fingerprints. And you think tonight they'll all just confess? No, he said simply. But they'll contradict themselves, and that will suffice. At 5:30 sharp, Fritz set the office, not the dining room. Wolfe wasn't planning a banquet. This was a battlefield, and he wanted the field shaped like a ring of upholstered chairs facing his desk. He had me set the chairs in a semicircle, no one directly across from him, no one with a corner to retreat to. He knew how to arrange people like pieces on a board. I'd seen it before. By the time 6 o'clock rolled around, the trap was dressed in mahogany and civility. The suspects arrived one by one, exactly on time. Larrabee was first, in a wool overcoat and a permanent scowl. Varner came next, lips tight, holding a small leather notebook like a shield. Ezra Wint looked sick, literally pale, blinking too much. Byron Gitties showed up smiling, but started sweating as soon as he crossed the threshold. Desborough and Rule arrived together, exchanging clipped remarks about traffic as if the tension hadn't yet occurred to them. Wolfe did not rise. He didn't speak until they were all seated. Gentlemen, he began, you are here because Ronald Dell is dead. Whether it was murder is not officially confirmed, but unofficially, he paused. We believe his death is directly tied to the upcoming Gormandale Gala. That got movement. Wint looked away. Rule frowned. Gitties cleared his throat. Larrabee's jaw tightened. Wolfe continued. Mr. Dell maintained a set of notes, observations, recipes, and patterns. Patterns of your behavior, particularly as it relates to consumption. Ingredients rejected, substitutions made, dishes altered without explanation. That's his job, Varner said sharply. He was the chef. He was also observant. Wolfe replied, and what he observed frightened him. He inserted a message into the gala menu, a warning. It was erased 2 nights ago from Miss Harrow's system, but not before it was seen. He let that hang, then turned his eyes toward Ezra Wint. Mr. Wint, you manage the club's ingredient procurement, correct? Yes, Wint said, his voice cracked. But I didn't. You imported saffron from Gujarat in bulk, enough to season 100 dishes, yet only 3 recipes featured it across 2 years. Where did the rest go? I don't. Were you selling it privately, through secondary channels? No, he said. I mean, some of it went to Gideon. Wolfe turned. Mr. Larrabee, why the need for private delivery? Gideon gave a tight smile. My chef uses it. I didn't trust Dell's preferences. You mean his transparency? Wolfe said. He logged everything, including your contradictory statements. You claimed a saffron allergy, yet you consumed saffron broth in. I didn't know, Larrabee snapped. No, Wolfe said softly. You did, but you wanted Dell to remove it from the menu, so you created the pretense. Why? Larrabee didn't answer.
Wolfe turned again. Mr. Varner, you refused white truffle from Albert during the 2020. Yet weeks earlier, you purchased 6 kilos personally. Why the contradiction? I was testing a supplier, and you told Dell it caused stomach upset. Varner went still. I never said that. Dell recorded it. Wolfe said. I stepped in. We have the notebook. It matches the shipping records. Wolfe went on. Mr. Gittiz, you helped wrote an order of Ossetra caviar through a Romanian broker tied to shell companies. You insisted on the origin being obscured. Why? Gittiz flushed. That's not relevant. It is if Ronald Dell found the discrepancy. If he knew Gorman Dell's suppliers were being manipulated for private profit. If ingredient tracking became evidence. That did it. Ezra Wint's voice cracked. I didn't want him dead. He said he was going to the board. He said, if I didn't correct the invoices he'd tell Gideon. Wolfe's voice turned glacial, and instead he died. No, Wint shouted. It wasn't me. I swear, I just deleted the file. I was trying to protect the club. Varner stood. You deleted it. Yeah, idiot. Varner spat. They'll trace that. You've destroyed everything. Sit down, Wolfe ordered, his voice rising like a whip crack. None of you will leave until the police have taken your statements. Mr. Dell's death was no accident, and it will be answered. They froze. Wolfe reached for the bell and rang it once. Fritz appeared. Fritz, show our guests to the front room. Mr. Goodwin, call Inspector Kramer. Tell him to bring 2 men. Quietly. Wint collapsed into his chair, mumbling. Gittiz was shaking. Even Larrabee looked deflated. Wolfe didn't move. As the door shut behind them, I said, you got him. He nodded. Dell discovered their scheme sourcing rare ingredients, falsifying allergy claims to steer investment directions, laundering profits through preferred vendors. He encoded the evidence into a menu, and they killed him to protect it. I poured him a fresh beer. What gave it away? The food, Wolfe said. Always the food. Inconsistencies, Mr. Goodwin, are like sour notes in a symphony. Eventually, they ruined the whole meal. And that, as far as Wolfe was concerned, was the final course. By the time Kramer showed up, red-faced, trench-coated, and trailing 2 stone-faced uniforms, it was dark outside, and the mood in the front room had turned sour than Fritz's sauerkraut. I met him at the door, where he didn't even pretend to be glad to see me. What is it this time, Goodwin? Another murder Wolfe claims he's solved before we've had a whiff of cause of death. Just a cozy little sit-down with 6 high-functioning liars and a motive marinated in saffron. I said, come on in. He followed me to the office where Wolfe sat, dignified as ever, hands folded across his midsection like he was contemplating war tactics, instead of culinary fraud and probable murder. Kramer didn't sit. He never does at first. It's part of his ritual. Well, Wolfe didn't flinch. Ronald Dell was murdered because he recorded the truth. That truth lies in his notebook now in your possession. The men in the front room conspired, or were complicit, in a scheme to manipulate ingredient sourcing and falsify food preferences to control the club's financial movements. When Mr. Dell documented the pattern and encoded a warning into the gala menu, someone killed him. Kramer turned to me. Do I want to know how you got that notebook? Found it lying in a drawer. Swore a blood oath not to tell anyone else. He grunted. What's the proof? Ezra Wint admitted to deleting Dell's message from the Harrow and Harrow system. Wolfe, that's obstruction at the very least. Several of the others contradicted Dell's ledger under questioning. Their denials do not match public records or shipping data. Kramer's eyes narrowed. So who actually did? I suspect, Wolfe said, that Ezra Wint confronted Dell after discovering the encoded message. A confrontation escalated. Whether Wint acted with intent to kill or merely in fear is immaterial. The deletion of the file was after the fact. Panic or clean, the act itself was likely unplanned, but deadly. Kramer rubbed his forehead. So you want me to book Wint and question the others? Wolfe said. Malcolm Varner and Gideon Larrabee benefited most directly from the manipulated ingredient flow. They pressured Dell. They controlled the club's investment shifts. Wint may have struck the blow, but they set the table. Kramer sighed like a man resigning himself to a very long night. Fine, but if your theory doesn't hold, it will, Wolfe said. He always says. The uniforms moved in to escort the guests out one by one. Wint didn't resist. He looked like a man who'd already imagined every outcome, and had settled on humiliation with a side of prison. Varner snarled threats. Larrabee refused to speak at all, and Gittiz asked if he could call his lawyer before Kramer even read his name. When they were gone, and the brownstone had returned to its usual blissful silence, I poured Wolfe another beer and waited for his final thoughts to come simmering out. He drank slowly. Then it always surprises me how those with refined palates can be so dull in their deception. They think complexity will hide intent, and it doesn't. I asked, On the contrary, Wolfe said, it highlights it. Simplicity does not draw suspicion. Obscurity, on the other hand, begs for it. Ronald Dell believed in transparency. His error was in thinking his data would protect him. It did not, but it led to justice. Justice, served cold. I muttered. Wolfe gave me a look. That's a pun, Mr. Goodwin. A mild one. You've made worse. He considered that, then let it pass. Later, in the kitchen, I found Fritz arranging plates with an energy that bordered on celebratory. Trout wasn't on the menu tonight. It was braised duck with wild mushroom risotto, and a lemon sabayon for dessert. I didn't ask why. I didn't need. When Wolfe finally came down, he said nothing about the case, just nodded at the aroma, sat at his place, and waited for the courses to begin. Halfway through the duck he glanced up and murmured, "It is a curious thing, Archie, how appetite reveals character, the deceitful nibble and discard, the arrogant demand and discard, only the honest savor." "I suppose that makes Dell honest," I said. "Yes," Wolfe said. "And dead." We ate the rest in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because the truth had already been plated, and Wolfe has always believed that once a matter is settled, it should not be reheated. By 9, the brownstone had settled back into its usual rhythms. Fritz was in the kitchen, humming softly. I was at my desk, thumbing through the ledger one last time, before locking it up for Kramer's courier in the morning. Wolfe had returned to the plant rooms, likely mumbling at his orchids about the perils of overcooking ambition. And as for the Gorman-Dale Supper Club, it would go on, no doubt, with fewer members, tighter menus, and perhaps a moment of silence before the hors d'oeuvre. I had a cold beer, a warm chair, and the sneaking suspicion that somewhere in the world, another chef with too much knowledge and not enough caution was flipping through a menu that might be their last. In this business, people rarely kill for money alone, but mix money with pride, secrets, and a pinch of saffron, and you'll get blood on the white linen every time. The next morning brought drizzle, a damp newspaper, and a long-distance call from Saul Panza. He'd caught the earliest flight back from California, and had fresh details to sprinkle on the already crowded plate. Wint was making side deals, Saul said flatly, but Varner was the one cashing in. I got the paper trail supplier rebates, routed through a shell company in Luxembourg. Guess who holds the silent ownership stake? Don't make me say it, I muttered. Varner, and he's not even subtle. He uses the same name for all his off-record enterprises, Vinci Tora Holdings. I pulled contracts signed by a Martin V. Harrow, and cross-checked them. It's him, an alias. It's him, an alias. It's him, an alias.
I whistled. That's not just fraud. That's greed with a monogram. Wint was the funnel. Varner was the reservoir, Saul said. Dell saw it. That notebook of his, it was a map. He just didn't know how much danger he was in. When I hung up, I found Wolfe already at his desk, sipping his first beer of the day and studying the front page of the Gazette. Kramer hadn't wasted time. The arrests had made it to print, though the headline was a bland chef's death tied to financial irregularities at private dining club, which lacked the seasoning the real story deserved. I handed Wolfe my notes from Saul and added, "It's worse than we thought." Varner was profiting both ways, controlling supply and steering investment decisions under the club's banner. Wint handled the paperwork. Dell tracked it, and then he got erased. Wolfe grunted. Pride and appetite are never content to share a table. I knew better than to interrupt his thinking when it was just hitting a simmer. He flipped open Dell's ledger once more and read the final entry. A half-page note written in tighter script than the rest, possibly added just days before his death. "Something's wrong with the truffle order. Ezra's nervous. Varner's been asking questions about the saffron reserves. I think the gala is going to be more than a dinner. It's a transaction. If I disappear, start with the menu." I whistled again. He knew. He suspected, Wolfe said, but he didn't know who would act or how fast. There was a long pause as we listened to the distant rattle of pots in Fritz's domain below. Then Wolfe said, "Contact Miss Harrow. Invite her for lunch. She deserves to hear the full outcome." I raised a brow. "Lunch? In the dining room?" "She has earned civility," Wolfe replied. "And clarity." Lizette Harrow arrived promptly at noon. She was dressed less like an heiress, and more like a woman who'd just faced down a storm, and lived to file paperwork about it. Her eyes were tired, her hands precise. She said little until Fritz served the roasted fennel soup, and the first fork clinked against porcelain. "I assume you've read the news," Wolfe said. She nodded. "And I assume there's more behind it." "There always is." Over the course of lunch, Wolfe walked her through the final thread. The Varna Shell Company, the falsified allergies used to steer investment, and Dell's encrypted warning. I didn't know, she said quietly. I knew Ronnie was worried. Yes, but I thought it was about ingredients, logistics, not embezzlement. Dell trusted the menu more than he trusted words, Wolfe said. He hid the message where the club could not ignore it. Buried in their obsession. If not for Wint's panic, someone else might have opened the file. The gala would have continued. The cycle would have remained intact. She looked up, and now, Wolfe said, you will need a new chef, and a new foundation. Lizette gave a short laugh, bitter but not angry. I might cancel the gala. No, Wolfe said, surprising both of us. Hold it. Cleanly. With integrity. That will sting them more than cancellation ever could. Let them see what honesty tastes like. It is often an acquired flavor. She smiled faintly. Spoken like a man who rarely leaves the table. I could have said you have no idea, but I kept my mouth full of lamb terrine and let Wolfe handle the philosophy. After she left, Wolfe retired upstairs to the orchids, and I retreated to the office to clean up the last of the paperwork. Dell's notebook sat closed beside me, a plain black book with more weight than a dozen ledgers. I didn't open it. I'd seen enough. The afternoon stretched long and quiet. By 5, Wolfe returned from the plant rooms, his hands faintly smelling of moss and lemon balm. Archie, he said, tomorrow you will return the notebook to Inspector Kramer. In person. Let him know it is the full and final document. Think he'll be grateful? No, Wolfe said, settling into his chair, but he will be thorough. That is what matters. I nodded. What about the Gormandale Club? What's left of it? They'll survive, Wolfe said. Clubs built on exclusivity always do. They will rebrand, recruit and resume, but the stain will linger, and they will eat with more suspicion than before. That is punishment enough. And us? I asked. What do we eat? He rang for beer. Tonight, duck à l'orange. I chuckled. Justice with a citrus glaze. Wolfe raised a brow. Archie. Real. As Fritz entered with the tray, I leaned back in my chair, notebook stowed, the case behind us but still echoing faintly in the walls of the brownstone. It had been a case about food. Yes, but more than that. About what people hide behind taste. Behind refinement. Behind menus designed to impress and mislead in equal measure. And as always, Wolfe had peeled away the layers, not with a weapon but with reason. With deduction. With appetite. Which when you think about it, is a kind of justice all its own. It was around 9 the next morning, when Inspector Kramer came storming up the brownstone steps like a man who'd been served a cold plate of crow and was looking for someone to blame for it. I'd just finished breakfast. Eggs, soft, coffee black, and was contemplating whether I had the stamina to sort through Wolfe's stack of unanswered correspondence. That plan was derailed the moment the bell rang. I opened the door. Morning, Inspector. You're early. Or maybe you just didn't sleep. Kramer shoved past me with all the charm of a busted radiator. He carried the black ledger under one arm, like it was radioactive. I read the whole damn thing, he said. Took me until 4 a.m. You know what I hate about your cases, Goodwin? Only one thing. I asked. They're never simple. He stomped into the office, where Wolfe was, as always in his chair. No sign of surprise on his face. He'd expected Kramer. And worse. Inspector, Wolfe said mildly. You, Kramer growled, have turned a financial investigation into a murder case, a conspiracy charge, and an audit nightmare for the DA's office. The brass is furious. I imagine they're more concerned with inconvenience than injustice. Wolfe replied. They're concerned, Kramer said, that this little club of yours is about to leak onto the front page for the next month. The city's tastemakers caught laundering money through saffron and truffles. It sounds like fiction. Bad fiction. It is unfortunately true, Wolfe said, and gestured at the ledger. And meticulously documented. Kramer dropped into the client chair like gravity was personal. Ezra Wint has made a partial statement. He says he confronted Dell the night he died. Says Dell got upset, fell, hit his head. Panic. No intent. He called Varna, who told him to shut up and clean it up. A lie, Wolfe said. Dell's injuries were internal, clean. No trauma to the skull. The cause of death was a rare, slow-reacting neurotoxin, likely ingested. That gave Kramer pause. Poison, he said slowly. That wasn't in the preliminary report. It wouldn't be, Wolfe said. The toxin used is derived from Amanita phalloides, a mushroom sometimes misidentified in foraging, but in this case, it was no mistake. I handed Kramer a typed summary Wolfe had dictated the night before. Dell documented a surprise ingredient test. 3 days before his death, he wrote that Varner offered him a rare mushroom pite, claimed it came from a French supplier. He sampled it, complained of nausea the next day. 2 days later, dead. Kramer exhaled through his nose. You're saying Varner fed him poison? Wolfe nodded once. Or had someone do it for him? It doesn't matter. The intent is clear. The motive, preservation of a profitable deception. Dell's evidence would have not only destroyed Varner's standing in the club, but exposed an international money funneling scheme. Hell, Kramer muttered, looking suddenly older. You think we can prove it? You have enough, Wolfe said. Especially if you pressure Wick. He'll break under the weight of it. He's a coward, not a killer. Kramer stood. I'll take this to the DA. If it checks out, you won't hear from me for a while. Which, lucky you, is the closest thing to gratitude I'm capable of. Inspector, Wolfe said. Your diligence is appreciated. Kramer gave me a sideways glance. Keep your boss out of my hair for a week, Goodwin. Just a week. I'm begging you. Can't promise, I said, but I'll try to keep him fair. After Kramer left, the brownstone fell into a calm silence. Wolfe retreated to the dining room for his eggs and beer, and I went back to my desk. Dell's notebook was no longer in our hands, but its echoes were everywhere. The gala was still on for Saturday night. Lizette had made sure of it, and I suspected its atmosphere would be about as festive as a wake. Around noon, Fritz entered quietly and set a package on my desk. I opened it. Inside was a linen envelope, and a handwritten note on thick cream paper. Mr. Goodwin, Ronnie trusted you. That's more than I can say for most. Enclosed is a copy of the final menu we're using for the gala. I thought you and Mr. Wolfe would appreciate the closing course. I pulled out the menu and scanned the list. 12 courses. No fluff. All classic. No foam. No tricks. Just the kind of clean, honest cooking that made old-school chefs grin in their sleep. But it was the final dish that stopped me cold. In memoriam, saffron broth, with white truffle and smoked mushroom puree, for Lionel Parr and Ronald Dell. I carried it into the dining room, and set it in front of Wolfe. He read it, raised one brow, then gave the smallest nod I'd seen all week. She's learning, he said. Think it'll go over well? I asked. It is not meant to, he said. It is meant to be tasted. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet industry. Wolfe returned to the plant rooms. Fritz prepared dinner. I caught up on case notes and started drafting a cleaner summary for Wolfe's files. Not for court, just for posterity. Because cases like this, the kind built on layers, not bodies, deserve to be remembered in full. And as I worked, I kept thinking about how he'd known the truth, and tried to speak it the only way he could in his recipes, his substitutions, his quiet annotations. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't accused. He had written the truth into the food, and someone had read it, and been afraid. That was the world Wolfe operated in, where violence was rarely loud, and justice came in the form of a man who rarely left his chair, but always saw further than anyone else in the room. At 7, Wolfe reappeared, sniffed the air, and said, Fritz has opened the pickled shallots. Excellent. Anything special for tonight, I asked. No, he said. Something simple, honest. And that, I thought, was the real ending to the case. Not the arrests, not the menu, but the silence that followed when the lies were over, and the truth at last could be served. The gala took place on a rainy Saturday night at the Gormandale Club's flagship venue, an anonymous brownstone on the Upper West Side, with no sign on the door and a custom brass keyhole shaped like a truffle. The surviving members arrived in silence, their drivers retreating quickly into the drizzle. No press was allowed, no photographers, no orchestra, only the aroma of reduced stock and roasted bone marrow, hinted at the kind of elegance the club once wore like a tailored glove. I wasn't there, of course. Neither was Wolfe. He had no interest in witnessing what he called the carcass of ritual, but Lizette had extended a private invitation. No speech, no spotlight, just a seat at the back table, and a promise that the final menu would not be touched. I turned it down. Instead, I spent the evening at the brownstone, cataloguing Wolfe's notes, while Fritz prepared something quiet: roast chicken with thyme, lentils cooked in duck fat, and a blackberry clafoutis that tasted better than a confession. Wolfe said nothing during dinner, which meant he was satisfied. Afterward, back in the office,
He sat in his oversized chair, his hands folded, as I flipped through the final details of the case. One more time. All 6 of them are either in custody or under indictment. Wint's already pled out. Varner's lawyer is trying to push the accidental ingestion angle, but it's paper thin. Kramer says the grand jury will eat it like mashed potatoes. Good, Wolfe said. Lizette's firm is rebranding. Harrow & Harrow is now Harrow Culinary. No more private clubs. Public-facing with transparency statements on sourcing. She's publishing Dell's original recipes in a commemorative volume. Wolfe gave a brief nod, the kind he reserves for things he considers tolerable. She sent over a copy of the dedication. You want to hear it? I assume it is sentimental. Only a little. I unfolded the note and read. To those who trust their taste over their titles. To those who write the truth, even in the margins. This menu is for you. Wolfe was quiet for a moment. Then acceptable. I smiled. That's practically gushing for you. He ignored that. The matter is concluded then. Kramer's handling the rest. Saul says the remaining Gormandale members are keeping their heads down. No one's dared to leak anything to the press. Of course not, Wolfe said. The entire premise of their identity was exclusivity. Once exposed, they are no longer elite, merely gluttons in tailored suits. I returned the Dell ledger to the filing cabinet. Kramer had allowed us to keep a copy, a gesture he didn't make light. Wolfe wanted it not for legal reasons, but because he considered it a superior document of human behavior. Archie, Wolfe said, do you know the most dangerous ingredient in a kitchen? Besides ego, he allowed the ghost of a smile. It is secrets in a kitchen spoil faster than cream, left on a summer stoop. They sour everything. The food, the relationships, the trust. Dell found that out the hard way. He did, and he tried to correct it the only way he knew, through precision. But truth cannot be served cold. It must be tasted warm, before it hardens. That was as close to philosophy as Wolfe ever got without quoting Montaigne. A few minutes passed with only the tick of the wall clock, and the distant clink of Fritz washing dishes. Then the bell rang. Not the front door, Wolfe's office bell, which meant Fritz had intercepted someone and deemed them worth our attention. It was Lisette. She wore a simple black coat, and no jewelry, and her hair was pinned up like she hadn't touched it since that afternoon. She didn't wait to be invited in, just entered, calm and unsmiling. I just left the gala, she said. Thought you'd want to hear the ending. Wolfe tilted his head, but didn't speak. That meant I had to fill the silence. How was it? Sober. Everyone ate politely. They applauded once. No toasts. No speeches. Just quiet. And that final course. The saffron broth. Yes. No one said the names aloud, but I think they all understood. She walked toward Wolfe's desk and laid a small envelope on it. One of Dell's recipe cards. I found it in his jacket after the police released his things. I thought, you should have it. Wolfe didn't reach for it. So I opened the envelope and pulled out a stiff card with a smudge of saffron in the corner, and a line of neat handwriting. When in doubt, tell the truth. When in danger, serve it. I exhaled. He really was one of a kind. Lisette nodded. I don't think he meant to be he just didn't know how to stop caring. Wolfe slowly and deliberately rose from his chair. It startled both of us. He almost never did that when guests were present, especially without prompting. Miss Harrow, I owe you 2 things. First, your judgment in coming to me was sound. And second, your discretion in not interfering with my process was civilized. She gave a tired smile. That's a Wolfe compliment if I've ever heard one. He inclined his head. If you ever find yourself in another entanglement of taste and truth, you know where to come. I hope I never do, she said. When she left, Wolfe didn't sit. He walked to the windows and stared out at the wet city night. She will be all right, he said at last. Yeah, I said. She's got backbone, and she learned the right lesson, which is that menus don't lie. People do. Wolfe turned. And so ends the matter. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and started closing the file drawers one by one. Later, as I was heading to bed, Wolfe called after me. Archie, yeah, tomorrow tell Fritz to prepare the trout again, but with the original saffron sauce. Dell's version. And that, as far as Nero Wolfe was concerned, was justice. Justice. And maybe, just maybe, a proper conclusion with the right flavor. The following Tuesday, New York woke up to the kind of front page Wolfe detested. Bold headline, speculative language, and a poorly cropped photo of Gideon Larrabee being ushered into a black car. Dining club dynasty crumbles under scandal, the Gazette proclaimed. Wolfe didn't touch it. He preferred his morning beer to come without tabloid garnish. I read it while he reviewed his orchid schedule. Wince pled guilty to obstruction and conspiracy. I said, cooperation deal. He's naming Varner as the one who passed him the mushroom sample that killed Del. Says he thought it was just to make a point, not to poison him. Wolfe didn't grunt or sigh. That meant he'd already anticipated the plea deal. And Varner, he's playing innocent. But the records Saul dug up, plus the evidence Kramer's team pried out of Wince's server should be enough. There's an emergency hearing scheduled for Thursday. Justice, Wolfe murmured, is often uncouth in its rhythm, but satisfactory in result. He closed the orchid book, and eyed the envelope still sitting on the desk, the one Lizette had brought with Dell's final recipe card. Wolfe hadn't filed it away, nor asked me to. That was telling. Fritz appeared in the doorway. Lunch in 20, gentlemen. Wolfe, the trout is prepared as requested. Wolfe gave the faintest nod. In the dining room, the table was set simply. Trout, saffron sauce, and a chilled Riesling. No flourishes, no artifice. The scent was rich, but clean, like something that had nothing to hide. Wolfe tasted the sauce first. I watched, because you can tell more from his face during the first bite of a good dish than from an entire paragraph of his vocabulary. He chewed, eyes closed, then nodded once, not indulgently, but reverently. This is Dell's, he said, balanced, bold without aggression. Truth. Fritz didn't tweak anything, I said, followed the card to the letter. He set his fork down after 2 bites. That was enough for him. Judgment made. After lunch we returned to the office. It was unusually quiet, even for the brownstone. No new clients, no ringing phone, just the distant traffic, and a lingering scent of saffron. Wolfe took his seat, then surprised me by gesturing to mine. Archie, I believe you deserve a remark. That's a setup if I've ever heard one. He steepled his finger. Your instincts regarding Miss Harrow, and your handling of the club's personalities, were commendable. The success of this case hinged not merely on logic, but on maneuvering human unpredictability. Well, I said, I've had a good teacher, even if he doesn't believe in pay raise. He ignored that. What we've uncovered is not merely a crime, but a reflection. The Gormandale men believed refinement excused duplicity. They mistook exclusivity for immunity. Dell, unlike them, believed the truth could be encoded in craft. He paused. He was right. I waited. That final dish, Wolfe said softly, was his confession, and his triumph. A long silence followed. He didn't speak, and I didn't fill the air with jokes. Some endings don't need punchlines. Later that evening, I checked the mail before locking up. There was one new envelope, hand-addressed in tight script. No return address. Inside was a single-page note. Unsigned. You saved more than a dinner. You saved what it meant. Thank you. I showed it to Wolfe. He didn't react, but he didn't ask me to discard it either. The next morning, as I poured coffee and Fritz prepped breakfast, I noticed Wolfe had taken the envelope upstairs with him, to his orchid room, and that from him was practically a frame and spotlight. So the case of the menu that led to murder ended not with arrests or headlines, though we had those, but with something quieter. A recipe saved, a truth revealed, and in a house on West 35th Street, 2 men sitting down to a lunch that tasted like justice. Maybe that's all any detective hopes for. Something honest. Served war honest. Served war honest. Served war.